Music. All right, value form. Value form. This is one of the most important and potentially most confusing concepts in all of Marx's analysis of capitalism. Marx explains these principles at length in appendix of the first German edition of Capital, Volume 1. But here are some of the fundamentals. One of Marx's key breakthroughs was understanding that commodities have many different properties which have different effects in political economies. Just as commodity production, labor exists in a duality of concrete labor and abstract labor. Commodities themselves also exist in duality according to Marx. Commodities have both use value and value. Use value, which corresponds to concrete labor, is the commodity's tangible form of existence. It is what we can physically sense when we observe a commodity. By extension, use value encompasses how a commodity can be used in the material world. Value, or the value form, is the social form of a commodity, which is to say, it represents the stable relationship intrinsic to the commodity. Note that this relates to the dialectical relationships between the material and the ideal. Value form represents rational equivalence of a commodity, i.e., 20 yards of linen equals 10 pounds of tea. These relational equivalencies are tied to the equivalent labor value used to produce these commodities. The value form of a commodity is the social form because it embodies relational equivalences. Number one, the value form represents the relationship between the commodity and the labor which was used to produce the commodity. Number two, the value form represents the relationship between a commodity and one or more other commodities. So commodities with each other, compared with each other. And value form represents the relationship between a commodity and labor. And that was like how labor produces. As Marx explains in appendix to the first German edition of Capital, quote, hence, by virtue of its value form, the commodity now stands also in a social relation, no longer to only a single or other type of commodity, but to the world of commodities. As a commodity, it is a citizen of this world. Understand social form of commodities. The value form was crucial for Marx to develop a deeper understanding of money and capitalism. Marx argued that classical economists like Ricardo and Smith conflated economic categories such as exchange value, price, money, etc., which meant that they could not possibly fully understand or analyze capitalist economies. British classical political economists like Ricardo and Smith outlined the scientific factors of the theories of labor value and contributed many progressive thoughts, which Marx adapted and further developed. And this is here. Adam Smith and David Ricardo revolutionized the labor theory of value, which held that the value of a good or service is determined by the amount of human labor required to produce it. Hold on a second. Making sure. All right. I'm not going to bring them up until we get some people up here. Thus, Marx was able to solve. Thus, Marx was able to solve the contradiction that these economists could not solve, and he was able to establish the theory of surplus value, scientific evidence of the exploitative nature of capitalism, and the economic factors which will lead to the eventual fall of capitalism and the birth of socialism. David Ricardo developed the concept of surplus value. Surplus value is the difference between the amount of income made from selling a product and the amount it costs to produce it. Marx would go on to expand on the concept of surplus value considerably. Surplus is the extra stuff that is not needed, or the thing that they hoard in order to exploit, to get value from. Utopianism had been developed. Utopianism had been. Wait, did I read that one? Yeah. Utopianism had been developed for a long time and reached its peak in the late 18th century with famous thinkers such as Heinrich del Saint-Simon, Francisco Marie Charles Fourier, and Robert Owens. Utopianism sought to elevate the humanitarian spirit and strongly criticized capitalism by calling attention to the misery of the working class under capitalism. It also offered many far-ranging opinions and analysis of the development of human history and laid out some basic foundational factors and principles for a new society. However, utopianism could not scientifically address the nature of capitalism. It failed to detect the law of development of capitalism and also failed to recognize the roles and missions of the working class as a social force that can eliminate capitalism to build an equal, non-exploitative society. The early industrial working class existed in miserable conditions, and the political movement of utopianism was developed by people who believed that a better world could be built. The utopianists believed they could create a new moral world of happiness, enlightenment, and prosperity through education, science, technology, and communal living. For instance, Robert Owen was a wealthy textile manufacturer who tried to build a better society for workers in New Harmony, Indiana, in the USA. Owen purchased the entire town of New Harmony in 1825 as a place to build an ideal society. Owen's vision failed after 2 years for a variety of reasons, and many other wealthy capitalists in the early 19th century drew up similar plans which also failed. Utopianism was one of the first political and industrial movements that criticized the condition of capitalism by exposing the miserable situation of poor workers and offering a vision of a better society, and was one of the first movements to attempt to mitigate the faults of capitalism in practice. All right, here we go. I'm going to read something from Claudia Harin del Verroy, Saint-Simons, 1760-1825, French philosopher, economist, utopianist, activist. Charles Fourier, 1772 to 1837, French philosopher, economist, utopianist, activist. Robert Owens, 1771 to 1858, British, utopianist, activist, owner of a cotton factory. Number 4, the law of development of capitalism referenced here is the theory of accumulation / surplus value. Surplus is the extra. Remember, surplus is the extra, which holds that the capitalist class gains wealth by accumulating surplus value, i.e. profits, and then reinvesting it into more capital to gain even further wealth. Thus, the goal of the capitalist class is to accumulate more and more surplus value, which leads to the development of capitalism. Over time, this deepens the contradictions of capitalism. This concept is related to the M, money, C, commodity, M, money, mode of circulation, discussed in annotation 14, page 16, and is discussed in details in part 3 of the book. This text is drawn from Political Economy, which we hope to translate in the future. We'll read that more often. Unfortunately, the utopianists were not ideologically prepared to replace capitalism, and all of their attempts to build a better alternative to capitalism failed. Marx and Engels admired the efforts of the utopianist movement and studied their attempts and failures closely in developing their own political theory, including that the utopianists fail in large part because they did not understand how capitalist developed, nor the role of the working class in revolution against capitalism. As Engels wrote in Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, if people want to read that, it's pretty good. The historical situation, here's what Engels says. The historical situation also dominated the founders of socialism to the crude conditions of capitalistic production, and the crude class condition correspond crude theories. The solution of the social problems, which as yet laid hidden in the underdeveloped economic conditions, the utopians attempted to evolve out of the human brain. Society presented nothing but wrongs. To remove these was the task of reason. It was necessary then to discover a new and more perfect system of social order, and to impose this upon society from without by propaganda, and wherever it was possible by the example of model experiments. These new social systems were foredoomed as utopian, and more completely they were worked out in detail, and more they could not avoid drifting off into pure fantasies. Engels is explaining here that, in a sense, the utopian socialists were victims of arriving too early. Capitalism had not yet developed enough for its opponents to formulate plans based on actual material conditions. Since capitalism was only just emerging out of into a stable form, without a significant objective material base, the utopians were forced to rely upon reasoning alone to confront capitalism. In this sense, the early historical utopianists fell into philosophical utopianism in its broader sense, defined by the mistaken assertion that the ideal can determine the material. In believing that they could build a perfect society based on ideals and pure fantasy alone without a material basis for development, the utopians were, in essence, idealists. As Engels explained, quote, "From this nothing could come but a kind of eclectic average socialism," end quote. Engels concluded that in order to successfully overthrow capitalism, revolution would need to be grounded in materialism. Quote, "To make a science of socialism, it had first to be placed upon a real basis," end quote. So he's saying that utopianism is based on idealism because it doesn't really engage with the actual material conditions and transform those things, I'm thinking. All right, just real quick, I'm gonna look back. Jesus, people are like, should I become a communist? That was a trap, wasn't it? All right, and keep going now. All right. The humanitarian spirit and the passionate analysis which the utopians embodied in their efforts to lay out concrete features of a better future society became an important theory premises for the birth of a scientific theory of socialism and Marxism. Natural science premise. Along with social economic conditions, the theory premises, the achievements of the natural sciences were also foundational to the development of arguments and evidence which assert the correctness of Marxism, viewpoints and methodology. Natural science is science which deals with the natural world, including chemistry, biology, physics, and geology, etc. Three major scientific breakthroughs which were important to the development of Marxism include the law of conservation and transformation of energy scientifically proved the inseparable relationships and the mutual transformation and conservation of all the forms of motion of matter and nature. The theory of evolution offered a scientific basis for the development of diverse forms of life through natural selection. Cell theory was a scientific basis proving unity in terms of origins, physical forms, and material structures of living creatures. It also explains the development of life through those relationships. These scientific discoveries led to the rejection of the theological and metaphysical viewpoints which centered the role of the creator in pursuit of truth. The centuries in Europe, natural science and philosophy had been heavily dominated by theological viewpoints which centered God in the pursuit of truth. Descartes, Kant, Spinoza, and many other metaphysical philosophers who developed the earliest theories of modern natural science centered their religious belief and their philosophies. These theological viewpoints varied in many ways, but all shared a characteristics of creating a, quote, creator in the pursuit of philosophical and scientific inquiry. Together, the law of conservation and transformation of energy, the theory of evolution, and the cell theory provided an alternative viewpoint which allows scientists to remove the, quote, creator from the scientific equation. For the first time, natural scientists and philosophers had created theoretical explanations for the origin and development of the universe, life, and reality, which did not rely on a supernatural creator. Marx and Engels closely observed and studied the groundbreaking scientific progress of their era. They believed strongly in materialist scientific methods and the data which they produced, and based their analysis on philosophical doctrine on such observation. They recognized the importance and validity of the scientific achievements of the era, and they developed the philosophy of dialectical materialism into a system which would help humans study and understand the whole material world. In Socialism, Utopianism and Scientific, that's a good book people should read, by Engels. Engels explains that ancient Greece dialecticians had correctly realized that the world is, quote, an endless entanglement of relations and reactions, permutations and combinations in which nothing remains what, where, and as it was, but everything moves, changes, comes into being, and passes away. These are processes he's talking about. Engels goes on to explain that it was understandable for early natural scientists to break their inquiries and analysis down into specialized field and categories of science, to focus on precise, specific, narrow subjects, matters so that they could build up a body of empirical data. However, as data accumulated, it became clear that all these isolated individual fields of study must somehow be unified back together coherently and cohesively in order to obtain a deeper and more useful understanding of reality. As Engels wrote on dialectics, empirical natural science has accumulated such a tremendous mass of positive material for knowledge that the necessity of classifying it in each separate field of investigation systematically and in accordance with its interconnection has become absolutely imperative. It is becoming equally imperative to bring the individual spheres of knowledge into the correct connection with one another. In doing so, However, natural science enters the field of theory, and here the methods of empiricism will not work. Here only theoretical thinking can be of assistance. As science grows increasingly complex, a necessity develops for the philosophical and cognitive, framework, which can be used to make sense of the influx of information from a disparate field. The dialects of nature. Engels explains how dialectical materialism is the perfect philosophical foundation for unifying scientific fields into one cohesive framework. Dialectics, divested of mysticism, becomes an absolute necessity for natural science, which has forsaken the field where rigid categories sufficed, which represents, as it were, the lower mathematics of logic, is everyday weapons. So Marx and Engels developed dialectical materialism, not in opposition to science, but as a way to make better use of scientific data and to analyze the complex, dynamic, consistently changing systems of the world in motion, while distinct scientific discoveries and empirical data are unavailable. Each data point will provide a small amount of information within a single, narrow, specific field of science. Dialectical materials allows humans to view reality as a whole in motion and to examine the interconnections of mutual developments between different fields and categories of human knowledge. How are we doing so far? Everybody?
I'm doing
all right?
I've got some notes and everything.
All right, good. No pictures yet. Endlessness refers to the, where was that?
No, you were further up where it says these scientific principles.
Thank you. These scientific principles confirm the correctness of the dialectical materialist view and the material world, which such features as endlessness, self-existence, self-motivation, and self-transformation. They also confirm the scientific nature of the dialectical materialist viewpoint in both material processes and thought processes. Endlessness refers to the infinite span of space and time in our universe. Self-existence means that our universe exists irrespective of human consciousness. It exists before human consciousness evolved, and it will continue to exist after human consciousness becomes extinct. Self-motion and self-transformation refers to the fact that motion and transformation exist within the universe dependent of human consciousness. Engels wrote of the scientific nature of the dialectical materialist viewpoint in Socialism, Utopianism, and Scientific Nature. You love this book? Sweet. Nature is the proof of dialectics, and it must be said for modern science that it has furnished this proof with very rich materials increasingly daily, and thus has shown that nature works dialectically and not metaphysically, that she does not move in the eternal oneness of a perpetually reoccurring circle, but goes through the real historical evolution. I like that. In conclusion, the birth of Marxism is a phenomenon which is capable of being scientific principles. It is the product of social economic conditions of its time of origin, of the human knowledge expressed in science at that time. And it is also the result of its founders, creative thinking, and humanitarian spirit. B, the birth and development stage of Marxism. Let's look back a little quick. Bootlicker. I'm just looking back real quick. Hi. Who got blocked? What do they do, Lynn? All right. B, the birth and development stage of Marxism. Marx and Engels initiated the birth and development stage of Marxism from around 1842 to 1843 through around 1847 to 1848. Later, from 1849 to 1895, Marxism was developed to be more thorough and comprehensive. But in this early period of birth and development, Marx and Engels engaged in practical activities. Marx and Engels were not just theorists, but also actively supported and participated in various revolutionary and working class organizations, including the Chartists. The Chartists were I think in England, they were in the revolutionary formation. The League of the Just, the Communist League, the International Working Men's Association, etc., and studied a wide range of human thought through ancient times on through to their contemporaries in order to methodologically reinforce, complement, and improve their ideas. Many famous works, such as the Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts, Marx 1844, The Holy Family, Marx and Engels 1845, The Thesis of Feuerbach, Marx 1845, The German Ideology, Marx and Engels 1845 to 1846, and so on, clearly showed that Marx and Engels inherited an quintessence of dialectical and materialist methods, which they received from many predecessors. This philosophical heritage led to the development of dialectical materialism, viewpoint, and materialist dialectics. And we'll get into more of that later, promise. There is a suitable, more important distinction between dialectical materialism and materialist dialectics. This will be explained further in chapter 1, page 48. So further on, with works such as The Poverty and Philosophy, Marx 1847, and the Manifesto of the Communist Party, Marx and Engels 1848. Marxism was presented as a complete system of fundamental views with three theoretical component parts. According to Lenin, the three component parts of Marxism, led by the extension of Marxist-Leninism, are: number one, the philosophy of Marxism, including dialectical materialism and historical materialism, which we'll get into more. 2, the political economy of Marxism, a system of knowledge and laws that define the production, process, and commodity exchange in human society. 3, scientific socialism, the system of thought pertaining to the establishment of a communist social economy form. These are discussed in more details in chapter 2. In the book, The Poverty and Philosophy, Marx proposed a basic principles of dialectical materialism and scientific socialism, and gave some initial thoughts about surplus value. The Manifesto of the Communist Party laid the first doctrinal foundation of communism. In this book, the philosophical basis was expressed through the organic unity between the economical viewpoint and the social political viewpoint. So scientific socialism is a series of social, political, economic theories intended to build socialism on a foundation of science within society, current material conditions. Scientific socialism is the topic of part 3 of this textbook, from which this entire text has been translated, which we hope to translate in the future. So I'm going to repeat that again. Scientific socialism is a series of socio-political economic theories intended to build socialism on the foundation of science within society's current material conditions. Let's remember that. That's one definition. There's probably plenty other ones. The Manifesto of the Communist Party outlines the laws of movement in history, as well as the basic theory of socio-economic forms. The laws of movements in history are the core principles of historical materialism, which is the topic of part 2, which we have, of the textbook from which this entire text has been translated, which we hope, and they're going to say that, yeah. So I'm going to read that a lot, because, yeah. The basic theory of socio-economic forms dictates that material production plays a decisive role in the existence and development of society, and that the material production method decides both the political and the social consciousness of a society. Social consciousness refers to the collective experience and consciousness shared by members of a society, including ideological, cultural, spiritual, legal beliefs, and ideas which are shared within that society. This is related to a concept on base and superstructure, which will be discussed later in this chapter. And base and superstructure is a good key component. Manifesto of the Communist Party will also show, the Manifesto of the Communist Party also showed that for as long as classes have existed, the history of development of human society is the history of class struggle. Through class struggle, the proletariat can liberate ourselves only if we simultaneously and forever liberate the whole of humanity. Within this basic opinions, Marx and Engels founded historical materialism and applied historical materialism to a comprehensive study of the capitalist production method. Marx made an important discovery, separating workers from the ownership of the means of production through violence was the starting point of the establishment of the capitalist production method. Workers do not own the means of production to perform their labor activities for themselves. So in order to make income and survive, workers have to sell their labor to capitalists. Labor thus becomes a special commodity, and the seller of labor becomes workers for labor buyers, the proletariat and the capitalists, respectively. The value that workers create through their labor is higher than their wage, and this is how surplus value is formed. Importantly, this means that surplus value belongs to people who own the means of production, the capitalists, instead of the workers who provide the labor. Surplus value is equal to labor value, the amount of value workers produce through labor, minus wage paid to workers. Under capitalism, this surplus value is appropriated as profit by capitalists after the products which workers create are sold. So what they'll do is they'll make you work extra hours, and then they'll sell the things that you produce at a lower cost. They'll sell at a higher cost, alienating you not only for wages but also from the product that you are producing. Broke, y'all, did you get your money, bro? Get your money up. Yo, Luna, yep, love Luna. Get your money up, guys. All right, do we got surplus good, or do you want me to repeat it?
We'll be repeating that when we study.
Okay. So, in discovering the origins of surplus value, Marx pointed out the exploitative nature of capitalism, because capitalism essentially steals surplus labor value from workers, which is then transformed into profits. Though this exploitative nature is concealed by the money-commodity relationship. Yep, 100%, I agree with you on that, comrade. Under capitalism, a worker's labor is a commodity which capitalists pay for with money in the form of wages. Workers never know how much of their labor value is being withheld by employers, which conceal the nature of capitalist wage theft. The theory of surplus value has deeply and comprehensively researched and presented in Capital by Marx and Engels. This work not only paves the way to form a new political economic theory system based on the working class viewpoint, It is also firmly consolidated and develops the historical materialist viewpoint through the theory of socio-economic forms. Karl Marx explains that the goal of writing Capital was to lay bare the economic law of motion of modern society by laws of motion. Marx refers to the origins and motivations for change within human society. Historical materialism holds that human society develops based on internal and external relationships within and between aspects of society. Historical materialism is a topic for part 2 of this textbook, from which, according to the theory of socio-economic forms, which is the basis of historical materialism, the movement of development of human society are natural historical processes based on dialectical interactions between forces and production and relations of production between infrastructure based, commonly refers to a base in English, and a superstructure, which we'll go over more and more, I promise. All right. The forces of production consist of a combination of means of production and workers within society. Under capitalism, the production force consists of the proletariat, working class, and means of production which are owned by the bourgeois, capitalist class. Marx viewed society as composed of an economic base and a social superstructure. The base of society includes the material relationships between humans and the means of production, and the material processes which humans undertake to survive and transform our environment. The superstructure of society includes all components of society not directly related to production, such as media institutions, music, and art, as well as other cultural elements like religion, customs, moral standards, and everything else which manifests primarily through conscious activity and social relationships. All right, number 1, Das Kapital. Karl Marx's most important contribution to political economy. It is composed of 4 volumes. It is the work of Marx, who career and an important part of Engels' career as well. Marx started writing Das Kapital in the 1840s and continued writing until he died in 1883. Das Kapital 1 was published in 1867. After Marx's death, Engels edited and published the 2nd volume in 1885 and the 3rd volume in 1894. The Institute of Marxism-Leninism of the USSR edited and published Das Kapital Volume 4, also known as Theory of Surplus Value, in the 1950s, long after the death of Marx and Engels. Interesting. All right, we have a picture coming up. Joe?
Yep, I'm ready when we get there.
We're there. Might as well just put it up, if you're okay with that.
Well, because I got to turn the camera on, remember?
Yeah, let me know. All right, here we go. Our first picture of the time. Why is it not letting me expand? Okay, there you go. All right, so here we go. In the preface of a contribution of the critique of political economy, Marx explains, in the social production of their life, men enter into definite relations that are indispensable and independent of their will. These relations of production correspond to a definite stage of development of their material forces of production. The sum total of these relations of production constitutes an economic structure of society, the real foundation of which rises a legal and political superstructure, and to which corresponds definite forms of social consciousness. The mode of production of the material life determines the social, political, intellectual life process in general. It is not the consciousness of men that determine their being, but on the contrary, their social being that determines their consciousness. So right there, you have the base, which we have the class relations, political economy, means of production, commodity, and nature. And then up here, you have the superstructure: religion, culture, government, media, and education. That's what they mean, economic base and the superstructure. The base of society includes material-based elements, and relations include political economy, means of production, class relations, etc. The superstructure includes human consciousness-based elements and relations, including government, culture, religion, etc. Thank you, Joe. All right. In other words, Marx argues that the superstructure, which includes social consciousness, is shaped by the infrastructural basis or base of society. This reflects the more general dialectical relationship between matter and consciousness, in which the material, as the first basis of reality, determines consciousness, while consciousness mutually impacts the material. See relationship between matter and consciousness. So, the base of society, being material in nature, determines the superstructure. While the superstructure impacts the base, it couldn't possibly be the other way around, according to dialectical materialist worldview, because the primary driving force of consciousness activity are rooted in material needs. Do we have the understanding there? Are we good on that?
I do. I understand. I didn't realize I was unmuted, but I understand. Yeah.
Okay. It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. You didn't do nothing wrong. Capitalism equals Americans last. I don't understand. All right. The theory of socio-economic forms provides that the materialist viewpoints of history is not just a hypothesis, but a scientifically proven principle. As Lenin explains in What the, quote, Friends of the People Are and How They Fight the Social Democrats. Here's Lenin. Now, since the appearance of capital, the materialist conception of history is no longer a hypothesis, but a scientifically proven proposition. And until we get some other attempt to give a scientific explanation of the functioning and development of some formation of society, mind you, and not the way of life of some country or people or even class, etc. Other attempts just as capable of introducing order into the permanent facts as materialism is, that is just as capable of presenting the living picture of a definite formation while giving it a strictly scientific explanation. Until then, the materialist conception of history will be a synonym for social science. Materialism is not primarily a scientific conception of history, but the only scientific conception of it. Capital is Marx's main work, which presents Marxism as a social science by eliminating the inevitable processes of birth, development, and decay of capitalism, the replacement of capitalism with socialism, the historical mission of the working class, the social force that can implement this replacement. Marx's materialist conception of history and the proletarian revolution continues to be developed in Critique of the Gotha Program, Marx 1975. This book discusses the dictatorship of the proletariat in the transitional period from capitalism to socialism and phases of the communism building process and several other premises. Together, these premises form the scientific basis of Marx's theoretical guidance for the future revolutionary activity of the proletariat. When Marx refers to the dictatorship of the proletariat, he does not mean dictatorship to mean totalitarian or authoritarian. Rather, here, dictator simply refers to a situation in which political power is held by the working class, which constitutes the vast majority of society. Dictatorship here refers to full control of means of production and government. This stands in contrast to capitalism, which is a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, in which capitalists, a small minority of society, have full control of the means of production and government. C. The defending and development stage of Marxism. Historical background and the need for defending the developing Marxism. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, capitalism developed into a new stage called imperialism. The dominant and exploitative nature of capitalism became increasingly obvious. Contradictions in capitalist societies became increasingly serious, especially the class struggle between the proletariat and the capitalists. In many colonized countries, the resistance against imperialism created a unity between national liberation and proletarian revolution, uniting people of colonized countries with the working class of the in colonial countries. The core of such revolutionary struggle at this time was in Russia. The Russian proletariat and the working class under the leadership of the Bolshevik Party became the leader of the whole international revolutionary movement. During this time, both capitalist industry and natural sciences developed rapidly. Some natural scientists, especially physicists, lacked a grounding of materialist philosophical methodology and therefore fell into a viewpoint crisis. Idealist philosophers used this crisis to directly influence the perspective and activities of many revolutionary movements. Imperialism. Lenin defined imperialism as a monopoly stage of capitalism, listing its essential characteristics as finance capital, serving a few very big monopolist banks, merged with a capital of monopolist associations and industrialists, and, quote, a colonial policy of monopolist possession of the territory of the world which has been completely divided up. Subjective and empiricist idealism. In the late 19th century, natural scientists were exploring various philosophical bases for scientific inquiry. One Austrian physicist, Ernst Mach, attempted to build a philosophy of natural science based on the works of German-Swiss philosopher Richard Averroes, can't say it, known as empirio-criticism. Empirio-criticism, which also came to known as mechanism, right? Machism. What is Machism? Can you look it up?
It's about to explain that. It's Marxism is the study of imperial criticism.
Okay. Marxism has many parallels with philosophy, and George Berkeley, 1685 to 1753, was an Anglo-Irish philosopher whose main philosophical achievement was the formulation of a doctrine which he called immaterialism, and which later came to be known as subjective idealism. This doctrine was summed up by Berkeley's maximum, esse est pure, it's a different language. To be is to perceived. Let me try it again. To be is to be perceived. Subjective idealism holds that individuals can only directly perceive and know about physical objects through direct sense experience. Therefore, individuals are unable to obtain any real knowledge about abstract concepts such as matter. The philosophy of imperial criticism, which has developed by Averroes and Mach, also holds that the only reliable human knowledge we can hold comes from our sensations and experiences. Mach argued that the only source of knowledge is sense data and experience, but that we can't develop any actual knowledge of actual external world. In other words, Mach's conception of imperial criticism holds all knowledge as essentially subjective in nature and limited to and by human sense experience. Mach's development of imperial criticism, which also which can also be referred to as empirical idealism or Marxism, was therefore a continuation of Berkeley's subjective idealism. Both Berkeley's immaterialism and imperial criticism are considered to be subjective idealism because these philosophies deny that the external world exists, or otherwise asserts that it is unknowable, and as such holds that all knowledge stems from experiences which are essentially subjective in nature. Marx argued that reality can only be defined by our sensual experience of reality, and that we can never concretely know anything about objective and external world due to the limitation of sense experience. This stands in direct contradictions to dialectical materialism, which holds that we can develop accurate knowledge of the material world through observation and practice, whereas Berkeley developed subjective idealist theological arguments to defend the Christian faith. Mach employed subjective idealism to purely secular purposes as a basis of scientific inquiry. See all the quotations below. Okay, all the quotations below from Lenin's book, Materialism and Imperial Criticism. Vladimir Lenin strongly opposed imperial criticism, and by extension, Marxism, which was becoming popular among communist revolutionists in the late 19th century, because it pushed forward idealist principles which directly impose the core tenet of dialectical materialism. Lenin believed that revolutionaries should be guided not by idealism, but by dialectical materialism. He believed that imperial criticism and Marxism consisted of mysticism, which would mislead political revolutionaries. Lenin outlined Machan arguments against materialism. The materialists we are told recognize something unthinkable and unknowable, things in themselves, matter outside of experience and outside of our knowledge. They lapse into genuine mysticism by omitting the existence of something beyond, something transcending the bounds of experience. When they say that matter, by acting upon our sense organs, produces sensations, the materialists take as their basis the unknown nothingness. For do they not themselves declare our sensations to be the only source of knowledge? It's a question mark. Lenin argued that this new form of Marxist subjective idealism was in fact simply a rehashing of old eras of idealism, disguised and dressed up as a new terminology. As such, Lenin simply reiterated the long-standing bedrock dialectical materialism arguments against idealism. He was especially upset that contemporary Marxists of his era were being swayed to Marxist imperial criticism because he found it to be in direct conflict with dialectical materials, writing, These would-be Marxists try in every way to ensure their readers that Marxism is compatible with the historical materialism of Marx and Engels. Lenin goes on to describe the work of philosophers such as Franz Blei, who critiqued Marxism with Marxist arguments as quasi-scientific tomfoolery, decked out in the terminology of Averroes. He saw imperial criticism as completely incompatible with communist revolution, since idealism had historically been used by the ruling class to deceive and control the lower classes. In particular, he believed that Marxist idealism was being used by capitalist class to preach bourgeois economics, writing that, quote, the professor of economics are nothing but learning salesmen of the capitalist class. Ooh, the professors of economics are nothing but learned salesmen for the capitalist class. Based. Lenin was deeply concerned and that prominent Russian socialist philosophers were adopting Marxism ideas and claiming them to be compatible with Marxism, writing, "The task of Marxism is both cases and is to be able to master and adapt the achievements of these salesmen and to be able to lop off their reactionary tendencies, to pursue their own line, and to combat the whole alignment of forces, the classes hostile to us. And this is just what our Machinians were unable to do. They slavishly followed the lead of the reactionary professional philosophers. Lenin further explained how imperial criticism serves the interests of the capitalist class. The imperial criticists, who as a whole claim to be nonpartisan, both in philosophy and social science, they're neither for socialism nor for liberalism. They make no differentiation between the fundamental and the irreconcilable trends of materialism and idealism and philosophy, but endeavor to rise above them. We have traced this tendency of Marxism through the long series of problems of epistemology, and we ought not to be surprised when we encounter it in sociology. In the conclusion of the same text, Lenin explains why communists should reject imperial criticism and Marxism with 4 standing points, summarized here. Number 1, the theoretical foundation of imperial criticism can't withstand comparison with those of dialectical materialism. Imperial criticism differs little from older forms of idealism, and the tired old eras of idealism clash directly with Marxist dialectical materialism. As Lenin puts it, quote, "Only utter arrogance of the nature of philosophical materialism generally and of the nature of Marx and Engels' dialectical methods can lead one to speak of combining imperial criticism and Marxism. 2. The philosophical foundation of imperial criticisms are flawed. Quote, both Mach and Averroes started with Kant and leaving him proceeding not towards materialism, but in the opposite direction towards Hume and Berkeley. The whole school of Mach and Averroes is moving more and more definitely towards idealism. Number 3, Marxism is little more than a relatively obscure trend, which has not been adopted by more scientists, a reactionary and a transitory infatuation. As Lenin puts it, the vast majority of scientists, both generally and in this special branch of science, are invariably on the side of materialism. Number 4, imperial criticism and Marxism reflect the, quote, tendency and ideology of an antagonistic classes of modern society. Idealism represents the interests of the ruling class in modern society. It is used to subjugate the majority of society. Idealist philosophy stands fully armed, commands vast organizations, and steadily continues to exercise influence on the masses, turning the slightest vacillation, meaning wishy-washy, in philosophical thought to its own advantages. In other words, idealism is used by the ruling class to manipulate our understanding of the world, as opposed to materialism, and especially dialectical materialism, which illuminates the true nature of reality, which would lead to liberation of the working class. At this time, Marxism has widely disseminating throughout Russia, which challenged the social position and benefits of capitalists. In reaction to Marxism, many ideological movements such as empiricism, utilitarianism, revisionism, etc., rose up and claimed to renew Marxism, while in fact they misrepresent and deny Marxism. In this context, new achievements of natural science needed to be analyzed and summarized in order to continue the authentic development of Marxist viewpoints and methodologies. Theoretical principles to fight against the misinterpretation of Marxism needed to be developed in order to bring Marxism into the new era. Vladimir Lenin would fulfill this historical requirement with his theoretical developments. The role of Lenin in defending the developing Marxism. Here we go. We're doing good. We got a half hour left, everybody. I like Lenin too. Lenin's process of defending the development of Marxism can be separated into three periods. First, from 1893 to 1904. Next, from 1907, Next, from 1907 to 1970. And finally, from the success of the October Socialist Revolution in 1917 until Lenin's death of 1924. From 1839 to 1907, Lenin focused on fighting against populists. His book, What the Friends of the People Are and How They Fight Against Social Democrats, 1894, criticized the serious mistakes of this faction in regards to social historical issues, and also exposed their scheme in distorting Marxism by erasing the boundaries between Marxism, materialist dialectics, and Hegel's idealist dialectics. In the same book, Lenin also shared many thoughts about the important roles of theory, reality, and the relationship between the two. The populist philosophy was born in Russia in the 19th century, with roots going back to the Nordic agrarian socialist movements of the 1860s and 70s, composed of peasants who rose up in a failed campaign against the Tsar. In the late 19th century, a new political movement emerged, rooted the Nordic idea, and a new party called the Socialist Revolutionary Parties was formed. The political philosophy of this movement, now commonly translated into English, was populism, focused on an agrarian peasant revolution led by intellectuals with the ambition of going directly from feudal society to a socialist society built from rural communes. This movement overtly opposed Marxism and dialectical materialism and was based on subjective idealist utopianism. This, with the book What Is to Be Done, 1902, Lenin developed Marxist viewpoints on the method for the proletariat to take power. He discussed economic, political, and ideological struggles. In particular, he emphasized the ideological formation process of the proletariat. In What Is to Be Done, Lenin argues that the working class will not spontaneously attain class consciousness and push for political revolution simply due to economic conflicts with employers and spontaneous actions like demonstrations and workers' strikes. He instead insists that the political party of dedicated revolutionaries is needed to educate workers in Marxist principles and to organize and push forward revolutionary activities. He also pushed back strongly against the ideal of what he called economism, and as typified by the ideas of Edward Bernstein, a German political theorist who rejected many Marxist theories. All right, number one, I'm going to a little bit of notes here. Populist faction. The faction within the Russian Revolution, which upheld the idealist capitalist ideology, with many representatives such as the Melikolovsky, Bakunin, and Plekhanov. Populists failed to recognize the important roles of the people, of the farmers and worker alliance, and of the proletariat. Instead, they completely centered the role of the individual in society. They considered the rural communes as the nucleus of socialism. He saw farmers under the leadership of intellectuals as the main force of revolution. The populace advocated individual terrorism as a primary method of revolutionary struggle. Bernstein opposed the working class revolution and instead focused on reform and compromise. He believed that socialism could be achieved within a capitalist economy and the system of bourgeois democracy. Lenin argued that Bernstein and his economist philosophy was opportunistic and accused economists of seeking positions within bourgeois democracy and further their own personal interest and to quell revolutionary tendency, as Lenin explained in A Talk with Defenders of Economism. The economists limited the task of the working class to an economic struggle for higher wages and better working conditions, etc., asserting that the political struggle was the business of the liberal bourgeoisie. They denied the leading role of the party of the working class, considered that the party should merely observe the spontaneous process of the movement of registered events, and either differences of spontaneity in the working class movement. The economist belittled the significance of revolutionary theory and class consciousness, asserted that socialist ideology could emerge from a spontaneous movement, denied the need for a Marxist party to instill socialist consciousness into the working class movement, thereby cleared the way for bourgeois ideology. The economist, sporadic, and I think it's amateurish, right? Character, yeah, like amateur character of individual circles. Economism threatened to divert the working class from a class revolutionary path and turn it into a political appendage of the bourgeoisie. The Encyclopedic Dictionary of Vietnam, published by the National Committee of the Communist Party of Vietnam, defines opportunism in this context as, quote, a system of political opinions with no direction, no clear path, no coherent viewpoints, leaning on whatever is beneficial for the opportunists in the short term. Lenin critiqued opportunist socialism, referred to as a critical trend in socialism and what is to be done. He who does not deliberately close his eyes cannot fail to see that the new critical trend in socialism is nothing more nor less than a new variety of opportunism. And if we judge people by their action and by what they actually advocate, it will be clear that freedom of criticism means freedom for the opportunist trend in social democracy, freedom to convert social democracy into a democratic party of reform, freedom to introduce bourgeois ideas, bourgeois elements into socialism, which is a contradiction. Huge contradictions. Thought on, I don't know. Thoughts on, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know about that metaphysics. I don't like metaphysics. The first revolution of the Russian working class from 1905 to 1907 failed. Lenin summarized the reality of this revolution in the book Two Tactics of Social Democracy and the Democratic Revolution, 1905. In this book, Lenin explains that the capitalist class in Russia was actively engaged in its own revolution against the Tsarist feudalism. In this context of this ongoing bourgeois revolution, Lenin deeply developed Marxist concepts related to revolutionary methodologies, objective and subjective factors that will affect the working class revolution, the role of the people, the role of the political parties, etc. From 1905, where are we at? We're good. From 1905 to 1907, Russia was beset by political unrest and radical activity, including worker strikes, military mutinies, and peasant uprisings. Russia had just suffered a humiliating defeat of the Russo-Japanese War, which cost tens of thousands of Russian lives without any benefits to the Russian people. In addition, the economic and political system of Tsarist Russia placed a severe burden on industrial workers and peasant farmers. In response, the Russian proletariat rose up in various uprisings, demonstrations, and clashes against government forces, landlords, and factory owners. In the end, this revolutionary activity failed to overthrow the Tsar government, and the Tsar remained firmly in power until the Communist Revolution of 1917. Lenin wrote Two Tactics of Social Democracy and the Democratic Revolution in 1905 in Geneva, Switzerland. In it, he argues forcefully against the political faction within the Russian socialist movement that came to be known as the Mensheviks. The Mensheviks, as well as the Bolsheviks, Lenin's contemporary faction, merged from a dispute within Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, which took place in 1903. In the same text, Lenin argued that the Mensheviks understood the forces that were driving revolutionary activity in Russia, while the Mensheviks believed that the situation in Russia would develop along similar lines to previous revolutionary activity in the Western Europe. Lenin argued that Russia's situation was unique and that Russian Marxists should therefore adopt different strategies and activities which reflect Russia's unique circumstances and material conditions. Specifically, the Mensheviks believed that the working class should align with the bourgeoisie to overthrow the Tsarist feudalist regime, and then allow the bourgeoisie to build a fully functional capitalist economy before workers should attempt their own revolution. Lenin, on the other hand, presented a completely different analysis of class forces in Russia. He believed the bourgeoisie would seek to compromise with the Tsar, as both feudal and bourgeoisie classes in Russia feared a proletarian revolution. It's important to note that Russia's industrial workforce was very small at this time, and most Russians were peasant farmers. The Mensheviks believed Russian peasants would not be useful in a proletarian revolution, which is why they argued for allowing capitalism to be fully established in Russia before pushing for the working class revolution. They believed that it was prudent to wait until the working class became larger and that the peasant class would not be useful in any such solution. And that's why we know that the Mensheviks were not successful. In contrast, Lenin believed that the peasants and industrial workers would have to work together to have the hope of successful revolution. He further argued that an uprising of armed peasants and workers fighting side by side would be necessary for overthrowing the Tsar. And he was right. So like they did the, I'm reading the third volume, but throughout that he talks about the dictatorship of proletariat with association with the peasants, that the proletariat needs to like come together and unite with the workers and have some unity. So it should be peasants and proletarian dictatorship. So yeah, from 1907 to 1917, there was a viewpoint crisis among many physicists. This strongly affected the birth of many idealist ideologies following Marx positivism that attempted to negate Marxism. Lenin summarized the achievement of natural science as well as historical events in the late 19th century and early 20th century in his book Materialism and Imperial Criticism, which I need to read, 1909, by giving the classic definition of matter, providing the relationship between matter and consciousness and between the social existence and social consciousness, and pointing out the basic rules of consciousness, etc. Lenin defended Marxism and carried it forward to a new level. Lenin clearly expressed his thoughts on the history, nature, and structure of Marxism in the book, The Three Sources of and Three Components, Parts of Marxism. He also talked about dialectics in philosophical notebooks, 1914 to 1916, and expressed his thoughts about the proletarian dictatorship and the role of the Communist Party and the path of socialism in his book, The State and Revolution, 1919. That I have read like 20 billion times and studied it. The success of the October Revolution in Russia in 1917 brought about a new era. The transitional period from capitalism to socialism on the international scale. This event presented new theoretical requirements that had not existed in the time of Marx and Engels' time. A series of work including left-wing, communism, and infantile disorder, 1920, and again on the trade unions and current situation and mistakes of Trotsky and Bakunin, 1921, the tax in kind, 1921, etc. Lenin summarized the revolutionary practice of the people, continued defending Marxist dialectics, and uncompromisingly fought against eclecticism and sophistry. In Anti-Düring, Engels defines the historical mission of the working class as 1. Becoming the ruling class by establishing the dictatorship of the proletariat. 2. Seizing the means of production from the ruling class to end class society. So right there, the proletariat is supposed to abolish itself as a class, leading to the abolishment, to the withering away of the state. A classless society. Eclecticism is an incoherent approach to philosophical inquiries which attempts to draw from various different theories, frameworks, and ideas to attempt to understand a subject, applying different theories in different situations without any consistency in analysis or in thought. Eclectic arguments are typically composed of various pieces of evidence that are cherry-picked and pieced together to form a perspective that lacks clarity. By definition, because they draw from different systems and thought, without seeking a clear, cohesive understanding of the totality of the subject and its internal and external relations and its development over time. Eclectic arguments run counter to the comprehensive and historical viewpoints. Eclecticism bears superficial resemblance of dialectical materialism in that it attempts to consider a subject from many different perspectives and analyze relationship pertaining to the subject. But the major flaw of eclecticism is a lack of clear and coherent systems and principles, which leads to a chaotic viewpoint and an inability to grasp the true nature of a subject at hand. Sophistry is the use of falsehoods and misleading arguments, usually with the intention of deception and with the tendency of presenting non-critical aspects to a subject, material as critical, to serve a particular agenda. The word comes from the sophists, a group of professional teachers in ancient Greece who were criticized by Socrates in Plato's dialogues for being shrewd and deceptive rhetoricians. This kind of bad faith argument was no place in materialist dialectics. Materialist dialectics must instead be rooted in a true and accurate understanding of the subject, material conditions, and reality in general. Spontaneously, Lenin also developed his Marxist viewpoint of the factors deciding the victory of a social regime, about class, about the two basic missions of the proletariat, about the strategies and tactics of proletarian parties and new historical conditions, about transitional periods, and about the plans of building socialism following the new economic policy, the NEP. All right, we got to come to a stopping point here soon. Ooh, who's in here? No one's in here. Okay. All right. The early 1920s were a period of great internal conflict in revolutionary Russia, with various features and factions wanting to take the revolution in different directions. As such, Lenin wrote extensively on the direction he believed the revolution should be carried forth to ensure lasting victory against both feudalism and capitalism. He believed that the October 1917 revolution represented the complete defeat of the Tsar. However, he believed that the proletarian victory over the bourgeoisie would take more time. Russia was a poor agrarian society. The vast majority of Russia under the Tsar were poor peasant industry, and thus the proletariat was highly undeveloped compared to Western Europe. According to Lenin, a full and lasting proletarian victory over the bourgeoisie could only be won after the means of production were properly developed. A fourth anniversary of the October Revolution, Lenin wrote, "This first victory, the October 1917 revolution, is not yet the final victory, and it was achieved by our October Revolution at the price of incredible difficulties and hardship. We have made it the start. The important thing is that the ice has been broken. The road is open. The way has been shown." So Lenin knew that the victory over the Tsar and feudalism was only a partial victory, and that more work needed to be done to defeat the bourgeoisie entirely. He believed the key to this victory over the capitalist class would be economic development, since Russia was still a largely agrarian society with very little industrial and economic development compared to Western Europe. Our last but most important and most difficult task, this is Lenin, everybody, the one we have done least about, is economic development, the laying of economic foundations for the new socialist edifice of the site of the demolished feudal edifice and the semi-demolished capitalist edifice. Lenin's plan for rapidly developing the means of production was his new economic policy, or the NEP. The economic policy was proposed to be a temporary economic system that would allow a market economy and capitalism to exist within Russia, alongside state-owned businesses, ventures, all firmly under the control of the working class dominated state. So what they're saying is the state was owned by the workers, and the workers owned this development. As Lenin explained in the fourth anniversary of the October Revolution, here he is. At this very moment, we are by our new economic policy correcting a number of our mistakes. We are learning how to continue erecting the socialist edifice in a small peasant country. He continues later in this text, and it's real quick. The proletarian state must become a conscious, assiduous, and shrewd, quote, businessman and punctualist wholesale merchant. Otherwise, it will never succeed in putting this small peasant country economically on its feet. Under existing conditions, living as we are side by side with the capitalist, for the time being capitalist West, there is no other way to progressing to communism. The wholesale merchant seems to be an economic type, as remote forms of communism as heaven on earth. But that is one of the contradictions which, in actual life, lead from a small peasant economy via state capitalism to socialism. All right, hold on. All right, okay. Personal. Okay. I just want to see something. 58, 59. Let me see something here, everybody. 59. 59. I'm looking. Oh, that's a good stopping point. We'll stop at 62. Go a little bit over. We'll stop at 62. Is that okay?
So we're going to be here for a long time.
What?
I have a lot of notes.
Oh, you do? Okay. Personal incentives will step up production. We must increase production first and foremost, and at all cost. Wholesale trading economically unites millions of small peasants. It gives them a personal incentive, links them up, and leads them to the next step, namely to various forms of association and alliances within the process of production itself. We have already started the necessary change in our economic policy and already have been some successes to our credit. True, they are small and partial, but nonetheless, they are successes. In this new field of tuition, we are We are already finishing our preparatory class by persistence and assiduous study, by making practical experience and test of every step we take, by not fearing to alter over and over again what we have already begun, by correcting our mistakes and most carefully analyzing their significance. We shall pass to the higher classes. We shall go through the whole, quote, course. Although the present state of world economics and world politics has made that course much longer and much more difficult than we would have liked, no matter at what cost, no matter how severe the hardship of the transition period may be, despite disaster, famine, and ruin, we shall not flinch. We shall triumphantly carry out our cause of its goal. With these great works dedicated to three components of Marxism, the name Vladimir Lenin became the important part of Marxism. It marked the comprehensive development step from Marxism to Marxist-Leninism. That might actually be a good stopping point. What do you think? What do you think?
That was the spot I was pointing out.
Yep. All right. Hold on a second. Let me do all my stuff here real quick. Got to add a bookmark. Got to take off a bookmark. We ended on 59. All right. If anybody else wants to come up and have a conversation with this, besides Joe, anybody? Anybody's willing to come up, have a conversation? Doodley, would you like to come up? You're welcome to come up if you want. All right, cool. Hold on a second. Let me see who else is all in here. No, not in, you idiot. I got 13 people in here. Holy crap.
Yourself that was ableist.
What'd I do?
You called yourself an idiot in a different way.
Oh, okay, my bad. I'll work on it. All right. So who should start off? Should it start with Joe? You guys pick.
I have heard just about every page, so it's up to you.
Okay. Dooley, do you have something particular, or do you also want to wait till?
I'll just do it after Joe.
All right. Let me get my thing on. Hold on a second.
Okay.
Let me get my my earbud in, so I don't. All right. Can you hear me all?
Yes.
All right. Cool. No echo. I guess it.
No echo.
All right, Joe, hit us with your best shot.
All right, so I started right at the beginning with value form. I wanted to remind everybody that this is going to be important, the value form of labor. This is one of the most important and potentially most confusing concepts in all of Marxist analysis of capitalism, and he explains these principles at length in the appendix of the first German edition of Capital, Volume 1, and then it gives some fundamentals. And, for example, just as commodity production labor exists in a duality of concrete labor and abstract labor, commodities themselves also exist in duality of use value and value. And then understanding the social form of commodities, the value form, was crucial for Marx to develop a deeper understanding of money and capitalism. And then my next note was, Engels is explaining here that in a sense, the utopian socialists were victims of arriving too early. Capitalism had not yet developed enough for its opponents to formulate plans based on actual material conditions, since capitalism was only just emerging into a stable form. Without a significant objective material basis, the utopians were forced to rely upon reasoning alone to confront capitalism. And as we know, they failed in their Lenin, I think it was Lenin that called it pure fantasy. Mm-hmm. And then natural science, the definition, because I figured we should go over some definitions, is a science which deals with the natural world, including chemistry, biology, physics, geology, etc. So like earth sciences is natural science, right?
Yeah, like the study of humans too. What he's trying to do is trying to say that all this is interconnected. They're not stagnant from one another. They all bleed into each other. That's the whole point of dialectical materialism, is to show the relations of the connections of these things.
Then my next note was in Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, Engels explained that ancient Greek dialecticians had correctly realized that the world is, quote, an endless entanglement of relations and reactions, permutations and combinations, in which nothing remains what, where, and as it was, but everything moves, changes, comes into being, and passes away. Does that have something to do with contradictions too?
Yeah, contradictions also bring on processes and brings on new developments, quantitative, qualitative changes, you know what I mean? Yeah. Processes.
And then Engels wrote of the scientific nature of the dialectical materialist viewpoint that nature is the proof of dialectics. And it must be said for modern science that it has furnished this proof with very rich materials, increasingly daily, and thus has shown that nature works dialectically. Nature works dialectically, not metaphysically. That she does not move in the eternal oneness of a perpetual recurrent cycle, but goes through real historical evolution. I thought that was really important.
Sweet.
Then the next thing, I've said, according to Lenin, the three component parts of Marxism, and by extension of Marxism-Leninism, or the philosophy of Marxism, including dialectical materialism and historical materialism, the political economy of Marxism, a system of knowledge and laws that define the production process and commodity exchange in human society, and scientific socialism, the system of thought pertaining to the establishment of the communist social economy form. And then I also marked on scientific socialism is a series of socio-political economic theories intended to build socialism on a foundation of science within society's current material conditions. So I thought that was really important, that we should...
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, we're scientific socialists. We want scientific socialism. Yeah.
Social consciousness was another definition, and it is the collective experience of consciousness shared by members of a society, including ideological, cultural, spiritual, and legal beliefs and ideas which are shared within that society. And then another definition was surplus value is equal to labor value. The amount of value workers produce through labor minus wages paid to workers. Under capitalism, this surplus value is appropriated as profit by capitalists under the products which workers created or sold. The products which workers created or sold. So I thought that was important. Historical materialism holds that human society develops based on internal and external relationships within and between aspects of society. And then we'll be going into historical materialism later.
After this book, it's the second part.
Yeah. Marx viewed society as composed of an economic base and a social superstructure. And the economic base includes the material relationships, means of production, and material processes which humans undertake to survive and transform our environment, whereas the superstructure of society includes all components of society not directly relating to the production. So I thought that was important.
Remember the economic base? The economic base defines the superstructure and how things are created, and who also is have the authority on society, whether it's a proletarian society or a bourgeoisie society, you know? Yes.
And then I wrote down this because this was really important. When Marx refers to a dictatorship of the proletariat, he does not mean dictatorship to mean totalitarian or authoritarian. Rather here, Dictatorship simply refers to a situation in which political power is held by the working class, which constitutes the vast majority of society. Dictatorship here refers to full control of the means of production and government. This stands in contrast to capitalism, which is a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, in which the capitalists have full control over the means of production and government.
Exactly, because they control the government, they control the superstructure and the economic base. We want control over those things to do what we want to do. We want to destroy the current and rebuild anew.
Yes, with the people leading the way.
Yes, with the proletariat leading the way, yes.
Lenin defined imperialism as the monopoly stage of capitalism, listing its essential characteristics as finance capital, serving a few very big monopolist banks merged with the capital of the monopolist associations of industrialists, and a colonial policy of monopolist possession of the territory of the world, which has been completely divided up. So I thought defined imperialism, the monopoly stage of capitalism, was an important definition for us to know.
And if you want to learn more about that, there's a book that Lenin wrote, Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, which he goes into more depth in that book. But yeah, that was a general good leading definition for sure. Good base, I would say.
Yeah. And then Lenin's definition of imperial criticism, it's a non-partisan, both in philosophy and in social science. Partisan.
Is that partisan?
Both in philosophy and social science. And it's neither for socialism nor for liberalism. So it's not for us. It's not for socialism. And then I highlighted some stuff about Bernstein. And then I highlighted opportunism and defined it as a system of political opinions with no direction, no clear path, no coherent viewpoint, leaning on whatever is beneficial for the opportunist in the short term.
Okay.
And then in Anti-Düring, Engels identifies the historical missions of the working class as, and I thought this was really important, becoming the ruling class by establishing a dictatorship of the proletariat and seizing the means of production from the ruling class to end class society.
Yeah, because the proletariat seeks to abolish itself as a class. The only reason why there's class antagonism is because one rules over the other, and there's still an essence of these things. The bourgeoisie keeps us in relations to them and subordinate to them at all times because we create everything for them. Yeah.
And then I got some definitions here. Eclecticism is an incoherent approach to philosophical inquiry which attempts to draw from various different theories, frameworks, and ideas to attempt to understand a subject. And sophistry is the use of falsehoods and misleading arguments, usually with the intention of deception and with a tendency of presenting non-critical aspects of a subject matter as critical to serve a particular agenda.
I'm glad you're going through this. This helps.
Then we get to Lenin's NEP, the New Economic Policy, which a lot of people ask us about, and I hope we go further into detail about the NEP. Lenin's plan for rapidly developing the means of production was his New Economic Policy, or the NEP. The New Economic Policy was proposed to be a temporary economic system that would allow a market economy and capitalism to exist within Russia, alongside state-owned business ventures, all firmly under the control of the working class-dominated state. Is what Lenin proposed for the NEP kind of what's going on in China right now?
A little bit, like they're in the middle of state capitalism. Yes, because you gotta think about this. Their progression in Russia was from an agrarian, like 80% agrarian. Marx's philosophy is this: that you have to move from feudalism into capitalism and build productive forces, because feudalism ties mostly peasantry. Where you develop into capitalism, you develop the proletariat. They were semi-developed. They were semi-proletariats and proletariats, but there was more peasantry. So they had to develop those relations. They had to develop those forces. Now that is a Leninist thing to go, but us here, depending on when we do the revolution, because we are underdeveloped, like, according to some people that I know, they say that we're going to have to build the productive forces because we are deindustrialized here in the United States. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there might be a time when we do this where we're going to have to follow the building the productive forces thing. But I don't think we're in an advanced capitalist state, so a little different than the progression of what they had to do. Mao did the same thing. He did 3 5-year programs, I think.
Okay, cool. All right, that's all I've got for notes.
All right, cool. What's up, Dooley?
So what I got from it was like how it talked about how certain forces would cause atomization between people, and even with the fuck, I have the word in my head, but it's not wanting to come out my mouth. I'm going to try and get it out. Like with the... And now it's not in my head.
It's quite okay.
Try.
When it came to like when it came to like
Marxism?
Philosophies like Marxism, and that it would only ever talk about the person themselves existing, and then there came the and then there was also the one where wait, no, that is Marxism that I'm thinking about, which makes it to where you feel like you're being a part of something, and you're being a part of the dialectic, but it's simultaneously not acknowledging you or
in the world,
other people, or the world, anything that you interact with, or anyone that you interact with. It takes away all of that middle ground that needs traversed to acknowledge more of yourself and others, and it takes that away. And on the eclecticism, yes, that word. I don't think that it's simply just taking from multiple like philosophies and theories and that. It's that people would only take it and not have any like way of making it into a consistent thought,
like a practice,
which I think is, yes, they don't add any consistency to it whatsoever, which I think is very important to state, because a lot of people are using like the whole eclecticism thing as a way to stay in their dogmatism. Because they aren't wanting to look at other areas from the lens of other people or other theories to get a wider view of the thing. So when it comes to eclecticism, I think what makes it eclectic isn't that they're using multiple people's philosophies and theories. It's that they aren't actually making it consistent, nor are they active in trying to have any thought of their own.
Yeah, because Marxism is an action and actually engagement of the reality and the objective reality of the worlds and how we engage with those things, and identifying contradictions and solving, and for creating systems that benefit like human development and movement towards liberation and emancipation. It's an action. It's an action. It's a doing. It's, as he says, if you want to do something, if you want to change the cake, you got to eat it. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Yep.
Does anybody else have anything else? Are we good?
I'm good.
All right. Thank you so much for taking notes. Thank you for showing that picture off of the superstructure and the base. Thank you for you, Doodley, for coming up and talking about your piece on it. Tomorrow we'll do this again. And I think if everybody, Two Spirit and Chicken Strips are going to go live. So if everybody wants to go over there and head over there, I don't know what they're doing tonight, so we'll find out. But I will end it. Thank you, everybody. I'll read tomorrow at 6:30 Central. Appreciate you all.
Much love. Take care.